The Own Your Intuitive podcast is for the creatives, spiritual entrepreneurs, and light workers in the world. The shining ones who have been told to dim their light and stop believing in magic. I say screw that. The time to rise is now. To bring your gifts out into the world in a big way, creating a business that feeds your soul and your bank account. You are a magical being with the potential to change the world, one human at a time. The time for you to own your intuitive is now. Hey everyone, I am so excited for today's episode of the Own Your Intuitive podcast. I maybe cyber stalked this person and was like, you have to do this podcast with me. You have to do this podcast with me. And it's been 4 months of coming. But the minute I met this guest, we were instantly connected over one particular story that we're going to delve a little deeper in today. But I am so excited to introduce you to one of my favorite humans. Kristen Hubbard is on the podcast today. Hey, friend.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on and being willing to delve into this topic with me.
I'm super psyched about it, so I can't wait.
Me too, because I think that there's not enough people talking about the conversation you and I are about to have, and I think that the more awareness that we can have about it, and the more that you and I can share a bit of our stories today, I think that will really support and help some other people. But before we get into that, the first place I like to start is just, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, Kristen?
Sure. That's a big question. So my name's Kristen, and by trade, I work for Amber Lillystrom. I'm her executive assistant, and I produce her podcast, and I help with writing and just kind of all of the logistics of her business. But what led me to that work was I was looking for a writing job because I'm a writer, and I've always, I've done a lot of different jobs. I've been a nutritional coach. I've been a CrossFit coach. I've always kind of wanted to empower people. And so I want to empower people through my writing. And I found a way to also use my work and the way that I made my money to empower people through what Amber does. So that's a little bit about me. I am an advocate for just living, living your best life, kind of whatever that means for you. I am sober. I am plant-based. I am a part of the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus, I think, at this point.
Talk about.
Yeah. So, and I live on the seacoast of New Hampshire with my little 1-year-old crazy dog, Kaya, that could potentially interrupt our conversation at any time. So I'm sorry if she does.
Which Kaya is totally allowed to do, because we're real people with real stories here on the Own Your Intuitive podcast. I didn't know you were a writer.
Yes.
I know you are a musician, which you did not mention.
That's true. I know I have my guitar in the background. I don't talk about myself often, so I don't know what to say.
I love it. But that's why I'm so grateful that you came on, so we can have the plenitude of conversations that we're going to have. And just, can you go back and tell a little bit of your origin story?
Sure. Growing up and kind of how I evolved into this iteration of myself?
Just that. Yep.
Sure. Okay. So I grew up in a family. I have one older sister, my mom and dad, they're still together. Beautiful family, but not without struggles. And so part of my story that it's kind of evolved and changed as I've evolved and changed, but I had, somebody in my family had a pretty bad eating disorder that kind of took over really the attention of everything going on when I was growing up. So I felt like I was invisible. I felt like there was no time for me, or that to have my own needs met, I had to have catastrophes or illnesses or things like that. And so I learned at a pretty young age to not only get attention through negative behavior, but I also learned how to numb myself through songwriting, music, which is a healthy way to kind of escape. But I also found other unhealthy ways to escape. And just, I felt invisible growing up. So that led me to, some things that we're going to talk about today, but specifically, drinking alcohol was one of my favorite ways to escape. So in my early 20s, I was really angry. I always had kind of an anger issue. I always felt like, my feelings didn't matter. Who I was didn't matter. And through the grace of God, the divine, whatever you want to call it, I wanted to get sober at 25 or 26. And that was where my spiritual journey started, because when I asked for help, I went to a place where there was people who were doing spiritual work and like mindset work. And so ever since then, I've kind of been on this path towards, I think at first it was just personal development, but then it became spiritual development. And now it's just, I want to be, not only do I want to be and awaken to my highest self, but I also I want other people to be able to do that, because I see myself in so many people out there. And, to go back, my family story has evolved and changed, because I don't look at them as, it's not their fault anymore. I see that they were doing the best they could with what they had. But it was something that led me to kind of my knees. And then that's where I was able to accept help.
So I know that was the fast version, right? So
Yeah.
How old were you when it wasn't hard to figure out, by the process of elimination, the family member that was going through some tough times, right? How old were you when that began?
I remember it kind of reaching its peak when I was in 8th grade. So it had been going on for years before that. I think it probably started around when I was 8 or 9. And then when I was 12 or 13, that's when it kind of started to escalate and get really bad. And then after that, things calmed down. But when I went to high school, dynamics changed. My sister went to college. My parents were seeking help for their own stuff. So.
And curiosity makes me ask, because I don't know if you know that in my house we have 2 kids who are entering the LGBTQ community. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
I didn't know that. No.
And so they are 13 years old. They're going to be 14, moving into high school. And I'm just curious, in all of that part of your story, when you kind of awakened to knowing, or did you always know, or like all that kind of stuff?
So I think if I go back, I think I always knew. When I was in either first grade or kindergarten, I remember trying to kiss this like girlfriend of mine when I was at her house. And I just thought it was like something you did. And I remember being curious about that at early, like pretty young ages. And I don't know if everybody's that way or not. But I remember in high school, I started to have like crushes on girls that were actually in high school, or famous, singers. Like Amy Lee was my first real girl crush. Loved her. But so I think a part of me always knew, but there was also the part of me that, I was raised Catholic, and through like what I was taught by extended family members and the church was that it wasn't okay. And so I just remember kind of always stuffing those emotions down and just being like, I'm not gay. I would never be gay. But when I was 19 was when I actually got my first girlfriend.
How'd that feel?
It was awesome. It was amazing. I felt like I was me for the first time, and that it was totally different. I'd always had boyfriends, and I don't consider myself like 100% like gold star lesbian. I do date men from time to time. But it was so different than dating a guy, and it just felt like, oh, this is why it didn't feel right before. So
gold star lesbian. That's the high standard is up there. That's like, you're a bronze star, would you say? Like
I'd give myself a bronze to silver.
I had to, because that was just so
Have
good.
You never heard of that? So they say like a woman who's never been with another guy is a gold star lesbian.
No, I don't hear of that. Like my whole world has been rocked in 2019 because I have two children who are coming out with all of their experiences. And I think it's a little easier now, right? Because like even when you were that age, it wasn't as open and you didn't get to like the university and college applications now have like what's your pronoun?
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so like, you know what I mean? There's such a greater level of acceptance now than there was. Yeah. And so, but for me, I'm just and if anyone's listening who is a parent to somebody who isn't like young, because like one of my children said, and I recently found out through my husband, that it was grade 1 when they said, you know, about girls, that they were like, you know, I find girls pretty. Is that okay?
Right. Yeah.
And Jeff was like, of course it's okay. Right? Like, of course it's okay. Right? But for someone that's heterosexual and never really grew up around the LGBT community, for me, it was like, is that like, it's like fascinating. Like, can you know that early? And so even you telling that story today feels very like anchoring to me. So I'm thankful for that. Right? When did your parents find out in the scheme of things? And how was that?
So they officially found out, maybe I dated myself wrong. I was about 20 when they officially found out. So I'd started dating this girl, and then I was moving to Rhode Island to go to hair school because I'm also a beauty school dropout. But at the time I wasn't. And I had left a journal in there where I had kind of said like, you know, this person and I kissed and we're together, and I really, you know, and it basically bared my soul to my journal. And at that time, my mom was worried about me, rightfully so. I was already kind of drinking and all of those things. And I had a history of depression, but she found out, and it didn't go well at first with her. And it's actually something that I'll write about at some point. She was really afraid of what other people were going to think. And she had never really, I don't think she'd ever known a lesbian. And I think she had visions for me to marry a man and have kids and all of these things. And so her response was pretty angry, and that was really hard. My dad's response was, he found out who the girl was, and he was like, he kind of was just like, well, does this mean I don't need to pay for another wedding? Because my sister was about to get married. So they were spending all this money on her wedding. And he was like, he calls me Sissy. He's like, Sissy, I love you no matter what. So that was really wonderful. And my mom and I kind of had a rough 6 months after that. But she really came around, and she realized what she had said and what she had done. And she loved, you know, she was like, I love you more than anything, and I want you to be happy. And if this is who you are, I accept you, and I'll work to change how I see this. And she did a complete 180 and has fully accepted, you know, I'm divorced, so I've been married to a woman. I left all that stuff out, but and she
I was a musician and married to a woman, but that's not part of my
There's
story.
got to be something else there too. I'm sure I missed something big. But yeah, and she, you know, they were so accepting, and they love, you know, they've loved the partners that I brought into my life since then and before then. So it was hard in the beginning, but I think when I was able to say, this is who I am, and this isn't changing. So if you don't accept this, I don't think we can have a relationship. I think that really kind of shook her, and she realized that she didn't want to lose me because of my sexuality.
This is really important for me to hear and for a lot of people to hear, because, you know, my kids are young. They're 13, mm-hmm. right? And so both my husband and I are separated. Mm-hmm. Or divorced. I'm separated because I was never married. He's divorced because he had a wife. Mm-hmm. But the alternate parents don't quite understand that it's about them, right? It's about them. And so, you know, even my ex it almost seems like he wants it to be diagnosed somehow. Mm-hmm. Like, you know what I mean? Like, where's the proof?
Right. How do you know what? Yeah.
Yeah. Like they need to speak to somebody that will say straight up from a like psychologist, psychiatrist somewhere, mm-hmm. that you are this way. And then like, what?
Yeah.
Like, Have you had to like face any of that kind of stuff growing up?
In terms of like, is there something wrong? Like, is there something wrong with you, or we need to find out if this is like just a phase?
Yeah.
I think at the beginning, my mom thought it was just going to be a phase. And I didn't, I wasn't sure after, you know, my first girlfriend. I dated a couple women, and then I actually went back to dating men. But the reason I went back to dating men was because I wanted to feel normal again. And got further evidence that I couldn't connect in the way that I wanted to connect. I couldn't feel intimate. And it wasn't even just about sex. It was really just about like intimacy in all of its forms. And so I'm sure there are people in my extended family that thought it was just a phase. But they never really, like my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, like nobody ever really talked to me about it. They all knew, but nobody ever, they didn't ask me like questions about it. They didn't ask me if I was okay or if it was hard. Like nobody's ever questioned me or said anything, which I guess in some ways was helpful because I didn't feel like they didn't accept me, but also it didn't really open up room for feeling fully accepted at the same time. So, but once I knew, you know, once I had dated the guys again and I kind of went back to my mom and dad, and I think I was living with them at the time. And I just said, I think I actually like want to, I think I was like, I really want to be a lesbian or something, like the way I posed it to them. Like, I think that I want to date a girl again. And they were like, okay, do what you want. We hope she's nice. So
That's so cool though.
Yeah.
Like, and so I was thinking, as you were talking, I'm like, man, I think I might even title this podcast Sex and Booze. Who's not going to want
That's a great, that is a great title.
Right? Because it's like, because we're talking about the sexuality aspect, and throughout this whole sexuality thing that you were going through, we're going to kind of wind into the conversation that you and I connected over, which was, you know, the fact that we were both in high school. I was in high school. I think you said the same, where I leaned into alcohol and that was it. Like once I started, I didn't stop for a very, very long time. And even when I talk to people now and they're like, wow, you drank that much? I was like, oh yeah. I was really good at like, I make it look like I drank that much, but I drank that much. Where in the story, because that, you know, did that become part of your normal?
I think, you know, when I was around 14 or 15, my sister was at school at Northeastern University in Boston. And she had invited me up a couple times and I'd stay over and we'd get like, can I swear on this podcast?
Yes.
We'd get like shit-faced. And it was a blast. But around that time, like that's when I was introduced to it. And I was always this kind of, I was too afraid to be bad as a high schooler because my sister kind of paved the way of being the rebel child. And I saw what it did to my parents. So I was more like, I don't want to upset them. So I started to like romanticize the thought of like, well, when I go to college, I'm going to get to, you know, drink all I want. And so when I turned 18 and I went to college the first year, it was the first night. And I remember I went like shot for shot with some like Pavlov vodka. It was like the bottom of the barrel vodka because I had a fake ID for my sister. And I think I got 11 shots in or 8. It was like 8 to 11 shots in and I was fine. And the other girl was like passed out on the floor. And all of a sudden I was like, I'm really good at this. I can do this. But that was, I mean, I started to drink anytime I could. And I was a blackout drinker. As soon as I got a sip of it in me, I wanted oblivion. Like I wanted to not feel because, you know, we've touched on like how other people responded to me being gay. But I didn't respond very well to me being gay. And it brought up so much shame and so much like fear and insecurity. And I just wanted to get rid of that. So drinking was that anesthetizer for me.
And I'm just going to say this so that as you're listening to Kristen's story as well, I was the same. I drank till I blacked out. Sometimes I remembered, which I often wish I hadn't, but sometimes I remembered. But most often, right, we drank to the point where the body couldn't keep up with the quantity of alcohol that we were being consumed. So the liver couldn't process it. That's how fast we were drinking. How much you drink is about how fast you drink. I've done some research lately. And, and then we would get to the place. And the problem with the blackout, and I'm just kind of interceding this here, is that you don't stop functioning.
Right.
And so from the time that you don't remember to the time you go to bed, you are still involved in the world in some capacity, but you do not have a memory of that the next day. Just to give anyone who's listening, like, what are they talking about? If they've never drank, what's a blackout? That's a blackout.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're 18 years old,
mm-hmm.
dabbled for, 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
You've hit the bottle.
Yep.
Because of shame and guilt. Did it begin like right away with being like daily, weekly, like monthly? Like how did it kind of wean yourself into it?
At first it was like on the weekends, because that was really when we could go get more alcohol. And when, I was always a really good student and I wanted to stay a really good student. So for that first year, it was on the...
Sorry, I want to know all of a sudden what you were taking.
What I was taking in school?
Yes.
I was actually in school for psychology. So yeah, I was, my sister's actually a therapist now, but it was kind of like, we always wanted to help people the way that we had been helped. But yeah, so I thought you at first said, what were you drinking? And I was like, oh, Captain Morgan's. I had like this group of friends and we called ourselves the Captain Ladies, and we just drank Captain Morgan all the time. And then during spring break of my freshman year, we went to Daytona Beach, Florida, and I ended up having, I'll call this like a gray to a blackout, because there's like flashes that I remember. But we were at a club and I was feeling super insecure, and like my friends were all like hanging out with guys and all this stuff, and I hadn't come out yet. And I decided I was going to walk back to the hotel room by myself in Daytona Beach, Florida. And I get back to the hotel. I paid for this like taxi cab, but they were vans. So there was like 6 or 7 other people that I didn't know in this taxi. And I paid for all of their rides, which I don't know why I did that. And when I got back to the hotel, there was a guy that we had met earlier. And I was kind of like stumbling, falling around in the elevator. And he was like, oh, why don't you just come back to my room? And long story short, the next thing I really remember is my friends are pounding on the hotel room door. And I kind of come to, and he's, raping me, and his friend has a video camera. And that was, that experience. And so after that, drinking got heavier, for sure. And it became more like during the week a little bit and on weekends. And I dropped out of college after that. And when I came home, for as long as I was able to like get alcohol from friends, or if the fake ID didn't work anymore because the cops caught me, so they took it away at one point. But anytime I could get alcohol, I always had older friends. So I was drinking at least 5 or 6 times a week. And almost every single time was blackout drinking for a long time. So.
Can you define a long time?
I would say about, like 5 to 6 years. So it's interesting because that whole time of my life, and I don't know if you experienced this, some of it is really just like muddled to me. Like I don't remember all of it.
It just was one really long day.
Yeah, it honestly does. And I there's so much that I did, because I just I left college and I worked at a real estate agency, but then I went back to school. So I was like moving to different places, but I had moved back to Rhode Island. I went to URI, I dropped out, and then I went back to Rhode Island to live in a beach house with some friends the year I went back to hair school, because it was in Rhode Island. And I was drinking in the mornings because I was working at a coffee shop at that time. So I would open up the coffee shop and I would pour like Franzia boxed wine into like a coffee mug and go to work. And I don't think at that time I needed it like physically. I think I just wanted, like, I was just 20, 21 years old and that's what I wanted to do because I didn't want to have to get through work without anything. And then eventually when I moved home and I tried to get my shit together, the drinking it would turn into like 4 days a week, blackout every time. And it was ruining relationships. It was causing physical altercations with people. I was doing things that were not like ethically or morally right to me. And so around the age of, I got married at 25, and alcohol was a huge part of our relationship, but it also caused so many problems. Like I remember throwing a dish at her head at one point. Like it was horrible. And I had tried a couple times to not drink and I could never do it. So at 26, I think I turned 26, maybe 4 or 5 months earlier. I hit what I call a spiritual bottom and I stopped for almost 3 years. So
I'm going to pause the story here because I want to go back. I'm going to take you back to Daytona for a second. Because whatever happened from that experience, and P.S. it's happened to me twice, not with a video camera, but twice I've woken up and been like, from blackout.
Yeah.
Because you can't control when you're in the blackout phase what happens. And not that what the guy is doing is right, but I didn't do anything about those situations. I said nothing. I told no one. I walked away because I was ashamed. I don't know what your story is there.
I didn't tell anybody about it. My friends that were with me, they actually got the video cassette tape at the time because it was one of those small things. And I remember when we got back to the room, one of my best friends was screaming at me and she was so mad at me, and she was hammered, but she was like, how could you do that? How could you leave without us? This is your fault. Like she just got so upset. And I remember just feeling so angry and so ashamed. And I just wanted to forget about it. I just wanted to I felt for a long time like it was my fault, and that it actually probably took me 8 or 9 years to call it a rape. Because I was in the elevator with him. I remember him asking me to go back to the room. Like I didn't say no to that, but I also, yeah. So that took a long time. So I never told anybody until, I think I got an abnormal pap smear a couple years later. And I told my mom because I didn't know what it meant and I was kind of scared. And she was like, she asked me about like my sexual history and all this stuff. And I kind of brought it up to her because at that time there's still not a vast sexual history, but at that time it was pretty, just a few people that like, I don't know. So
I have a vast sexual history because that was how I was looking for love.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, and that was part of the, like, when I say morally, I was doing things that didn't feel right to me. Like that became a part of it for sure, especially after, like just kind of losing when I got to a point of drinking where I had, been in physical altercations with people I was dating. I felt like I stopped losing that like compass of this is right, this is wrong for a little bit.
Yeah, I can. So I got you. The minute you have more than 2 drinks, you stop making logical decisions.
Yeah.
And even if I would say like, I'll stop at 2, I was fucking lying. I could never, one was stupid. Who has 1 drink? Nobody. Even because we talked about this, I've tried recently to go and have a drink. I can't do it because it turns into like more than 1 drink.
Yeah.
Right? Now, what I find interesting is even your first experience And drinking becomes something we boast about, you guys. Like, it becomes like something that's like, you know, a star on your, like, look at how much I can drink. And you saying, I, you know, matched this woman shot for shot, and she was on the floor and I was at the bar. That was also something that was really, it made me proud, is I would drink the same as men. Right? Yep. Like, for every shot they did, I did. For every tall can, I drank the same. It was like, I like somehow created a, like, what do I want to say? Like, I am the world's greatest female drinker in the land because I can drink X amount more than any other woman in the planet.
I totally get that, though, because it feels like this badge of honor to be like, for me, it was always, I liked being one of the boys, or at least being able to keep up with the boys. And if I was going to drink, I was going to drink well. So.
Oh, yeah. My question for you is, like, do you think that the altercations that we're having, because I didn't have the same, is because of the anger that you had inside of you that you never dealt with? That was the emotion that created the response?
Yeah, there was rage, like just rage underneath everything. And I, specifically the person, it was a girl I had been dating for a while. So there was somebody else that I got in a physical altercation with, but I didn't know them. But she, like, we had a really volatile relationship to begin with. And so she kind of, I put my rage, like, I put her face on my rage. Like, she was the one bringing all these things up, but it was really my own. And so when we were drinking, it escalated so quickly, to the point where it wasn't just me. But if I hadn't been drinking the way that I was, I don't think she would have gone to that place, because my sister always said, like, something in your eyes shifts, like, you're drinking and you're fine and you're having fun. And she's like, and then something, like, changes in your eyes and you're not there anymore. And I would just get mean and I would get nasty.
I think this is a fascinating story, because I think that, you know, we drank for different emotions we were hiding, and the alternate, like, the very thing that we needed to deal with would come up in the worst ways when we were in our drunkest states. So the anger, that was the emotion that you were holding, right, would come out. And for me, it was the, like, low self-esteem, low self-worthiness, was this desire for all the attention and for the boys and going home with them and finding myself in beds and doing all of those kinds of things, right? The story gets really positive soon, guys, for everybody listening.
Yes.
Not a pro drinking, but the thing is like, there comes a point where, you know, you have your hallelujah moment. You're 26 when you have it.
Yeah.
I was 40. So there's that. But when you were 26 and you said, like, asked for a sign from God, because that's how, you know, you'd got to. And I didn't black out all that time. I went through phases of harden, soft out, harden, soft out. Where did you find yourself in that moment that you were able to say, I can quit for 3 years? Like, what, like, where, I want to know, was it an event? Was it like a dinner party? Something.
Well, so I always like to tell a story because it's so, like, what I like about what I consider my real, like, that bottom, and I will say, or maybe we'll talk about this, this wasn't the last time that I drank, but it was the last time I drank for a long time. I went to, like, a barbecue at a friend's house the night before, and I had sworn to my wife at the time, we brought 2 bottles of wine, one for the hosts and then one for ourselves. And I was like, I'm just going to have 2 glasses of wine tonight. That's it. It was always 2.
2 glasses.
Always 2. And pretty quickly I had finished 3 of the glasses out of, like, the 4 in the bottle of wine. And then I was like, maybe I should go open up the bottle that we brought for the people hosting the party. And so I finished that really quickly. And then I was doing shots of Hennessy by the end of the night. And like, nothing eventful happened that night, other than one thing that always felt really icky to me after was the guy's house that we were at with his family. He was, like, an army ranger, so he had a bunch of guns, in the house, and he was showing me one of his rifles, and I was pretty messed up and holding this like loaded gun. I think, I'm almost positive it was loaded, and his kids were around, and nothing ever happened. But I just remember thinking about that like a couple days later and feeling like, oh my God, like I should not have been holding that. I was not okay. But I woke up the next morning, and because things started to dim out at the end of the night. I didn't really remember how the night ended. I didn't remember like getting home. And I woke up the next morning with this like pit in my stomach. And it was a pit that I often woke up with, of like, oh God, what did I do last night? And I just got this flash of like, of Taco Bell. And I was like, and then I saw like me and my ex-wife like arguing. And I just go, if there's Taco Bell wrappers like in the trash can when I get up, I'm in trouble. Like I just knew. I just had this feeling like I had caused something and I had said some really horrible things or something. So I walk out to the kitchen, and they're not in the trash. They're all over the countertop, like half-eaten like nachos Bel Grande and like chalupas. And for some reason, like, and it always makes me laugh because like I loved Taco Bell, but I only had it when I was hammered. My ex was at work, and I just remember I walked into the living room. All the shades were drawn. It was like so dark. It felt like this like cave. And I just remember dropping down to the living room floor, and I was literally on my knees. I didn't have a God of my own understanding at that point. But I was on my knees, and I was just like, I need help. Like, I can't do this anymore. Cause I knew I had done something the night before. I knew I had caused another fight. I knew I had like, basically that like, God damn it, I did it again. Like, was always just how I felt. And thankfully I had a friend who I knew she was in a program of recovery, and we had drank together years before, like maybe 4 or 5 years earlier, like just when she was in college. But I knew she was sober now. And so I randomly, something just said, just text her. And so all I did was I texted her and I said, hey, how are you? And her response was, I'm going to a gathering today. And she's like, it's a sober gathering. Do you want to come? And I didn't say anything about wanting to be sober. I didn't say anything. But I was like, yeah. And so I met up with her later and basically had kind of my first, like, we'll call it like sober meeting one-on-one with her. And that lasted for close to 3 years.
So would she then have became something like a sponsor to you?
She wasn't. I did go to a 12-step recovery program after that. And I had mentors, and I had one specific one that walked me through the steps. And she was always, my friend was always such an integral part of my life and recovery. But I definitely reached out to other women who I didn't have or didn't already have personal relationships with or history with, because I needed that kind of objective perspective from them. So I had somebody that I literally called. I called her almost every day, and I was constantly going to different meetings and things like that. And so sobriety became it was something that I was just, I don't know if I was obsessed with it so much as I just didn't want to feel the way I felt anymore. So, and it worked. It worked for a long time, and it would have still continued to work if I hadn't have chosen to leave the program that I was in, which was I guess some people would say probably because I wanted to get drunk. I didn't want to, and I know the program that I was in works for so many people and it's beautiful, but I also felt like there was a part of it that was like, I don't want this to define who I am. I don't want this to be something that I'm reminded of every single day. I want to recover, and I want to be able to help, to kind of, I think now I know I'll always have to remember first and foremost that I can't drink. I can't. But at the time I was like, I don't want to identify as an alcoholic, or I don't want to identify as these things. So I want to find another way that doesn't make me feel like I'm still sick. And so that was kind of how I stepped out. And then it took a couple months, but I did drink again. I have drank again on multiple, my recovery's kind of waffled back and forth from trying moderation to being abstinent for 9, 10, 11 months at a time. And then moderation always turns into
not moderation.
And so it's been a process, but I do feel like the recovery that I was seeking, I am finally lucky enough to feel like I'm getting there.
When you decided to sober up in those 3 years, because you had said that it was an integral part of the relationship you had created with your then wife, was it your sobriety? Like, I don't even know where, like, I'm just guessing that maybe you got sober and the relationship didn't last. I'm just throwing things in because I don't know yet.
Sure. It was so interesting. We were just such a horrible match to begin with. We were so different, but I think the drama made us so passionate in the beginning about each other. But my sobriety definitely put a damper on things. And we stopped being able to relate. And I got sober pretty quickly into our marriage. I think we had been married less than a year. I would say 9 months when I got sober. And then we got a divorce right around the 5-year mark of our marriage. So I was sober for most of it. And when I did go back to drinking, she would always say to me, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, even though it really kind of, I think her biggest thing was she always felt like I was adopting these new mindsets, and I was like kind of bringing in different language. And I was all of a sudden like, well, maybe we shouldn't look at these people like this, or maybe, just kind of like, and she always thought I was being brainwashed, and she thought I couldn't think for myself. And like, there's a joke in the program that's like, you're not like, maybe your brain does need some washing. It's a little, it's a little messed up, but it was just me shifting into seeing life in a different way. And we became fundamentally different. And at some point it was just like, what are we doing? Why are we still trying to make this work if us working makes both of us miserable? So
what were you doing career-wise before the sobriety and after the sobriety?
Oh, that's a question. So I'm a manifesting generator. I just learned this about myself. And one of the things with them is
the design thing. If you're questioning what you just said, there's like there's 4 different: generator, manifesting generator, projector, and something that I've never known anyone to be. And I can't remember.
I don't know what it is.
Top of my head. But it does like checks the time of your birth and the date of your birth and where you were born. And it gives you a whole lot of information about who you are. You look up human design and you will see it. Okay, go ahead.
It's super interesting. So I was doing, actually, Amber, had us look it up, and what it said about me, I swear this is on topic, is one of the criticisms I might receive from people is that I'm constantly jumping from thing to thing because I'm multi-passionate and I have, multi-passions. So I don't really know what I was doing. So before I got sober, is that what you asked?
Yeah, like, so I was just curious, like, how did your life change? Like, what, like, I know that you were married, but like
I was
business changes too when we're sober.
Yeah. Well, so I had gotten into health and fitness, and I was
during the sobriety or before the sobriety?
Right before. So it was always something. Wellness was always something I was really interested in, and so I finally got a job at a gym I liked, and I started CrossFitting, and
that's also addiction.
And so I wanted to become a CrossFit coach, and so I actually I was just managing the gym at the time, but about a month or 2 after I got sober, I went and got my CrossFit Level 1 certification, and I apprenticed for a little while and then took over like one class here and there. And then ultimately I think I coached 6 classes a day. That might be lying. I think it was maybe like 4 classes a day. And then 5 days a week I worked on like Saturday. So I started to actually I I was managing the gym. I was kind of leading like the head trainer besides the head trainer at that gym. And I was building this community of people who were then coming to me as like, it's really when I started like mentoring people without knowing that I was mentoring people, because and I'm sure you know this, like after the class is over, people kind of come over and they start talking to you, and suddenly they're, you know, telling you about their lives and bearing all, and kind of asking you for your input or for your guidance. And it was this really beautiful thing that I found. So my career and the way that I was working just only evolved the more, like, not the more sober I got, but the more clear that I got. And I loved it. I was really happy there for a long time.
Well, I mean, this is another part of our story that we share, because I was a personal trainer for 9 years, working in a gym and doing fitness classes, right? Like, so when she said, you know this, it's because she's relating to that piece of my history as well. So this is what I mean. When Kristen and I sat down to have a conversation on our first time meeting, it was like, what? Me too? What? What? Me too.
Are you my soul twin?
I know. Like, did we have the same mother? And we just didn't know. Like, I'm not sure. Right? But it is true. The clarity comes through so much more. And I mean, even from being in the personal training, like this was where I would ebb and flow as well. And it would go down to very minimal drinking. And I seemed to have control over it before it would spike. Now, what happened when you went back to drinking after this 3 years?
So at first, I will say that there was usually a couple week period where I could moderate. It was never, I always said I'd only have 2. Maybe I had 3 or 4, but I wasn't blacking out. Like but I could never hold myself to the standard that I had set. But it would just always, the reason that I really felt like I wanted to drink after being sober, and when I do when I have picked up again, is like, I just want relief. Like there's like this, the meditation's not working, the prayer's not working, or I'm not doing it, but I'm, you know, like nothing seems to like kind of take the air out of the balloon that's about to burst. And so I go, I just need a drink is always kind of what leads to it. And so there's that first drink that always feels like all of my answers, like all of my problems are solved. And then what slowly has happened over time is I take the first drink and I realize that I haven't solved any problems. I've just created more by taking that first drink. And then it would just start to become like, I'd be like, oh, I'm only going to drink once a month. And then suddenly it's like, well, maybe once a week. And like, I was always bargaining with myself to be like, once I kind of opened the door to it, it wasn't long before I was drinking almost every night again and blacking out or just passing out at that point. Because now that I'm older, it's really just, I don't stay up that late. So I just drink to pass out.
It's a true story. So you're in your 30s when you went, like you're 30-ish when you started back the first time?
I think I must have been like close to, I was 29 because I did have a couple drinks on my 30th birthday. I remember that.
So then like when you go back, like how long did each of those times that you went back to drinking last?
They've gotten shorter and shorter. When I got divorced was a time that I went back to drinking, and I moved out of our home at the end of April, and I was working at a restaurant, and I just kind of fully dove into waitress restaurant, like drinking lifestyle. And that lasted for about 5 to 6 months. But the way that not now in this moment, but the last time that I decided to do some more experimenting, it was about like a month to a month and a half of what I would call relapse. And I always want to like make a disclaimer too, because relapse has been a part of my recovery, and I know it, thankfully, I am not yet the type of drinker. I've never been the type of drinker where if I drank, it was going to lead me to die immediately. So I've always but I do know people who, if they picked up one drink, would end up in jail, or it would be the end. And so, I'm really grateful that I've, at least every time that I've kind of gone back out, there's still like, there's another recovery left in me. And so the last time was probably, like I would say probably closer to a month and a half of actual, what I call relapse, because when I pick up, if I'm just having one and I tell myself, oh, I'm just having one, I don't want to be like, you relapsed again and you failed. I don't like that language. I don't like kind of beating myself up for it. But it was the shortest. Oh, there's Kaya. Hi. But that was the shortest one. And so, I mean, I hope it was the last one.
Well, I think this is a really powerful story because you and I had obviously hit it off, and I had messaged you and I had said, Kristen, come on my podcast. I want to talk about being sober sisters and how important this conversation is for others to hear. So if they're doing what we did and drinking a bottle of wine every night, and if somebody took a glass out of your bottle of wine and you look at it and you're like, fuck, now I need to open another bottle because I drink a bottle of wine. That's my prescription to myself. That's how I relax, or that's how I do whatever. That was my thing. This is how I relax, by a bottle of wine.
Yep.
Every night. Not a glass, people, a bottle. And so I had asked you and you had said yes. And then you disappeared. Right? And then, and then I messaged you again and you said, I don't know if you want me to come on because I've had I've started to, I'm not again, but I drank for that bit. And I said, me too. Because I had been sober for the year and then dabbled for 4 to 6 weeks. I was like, no, this is also part of the conversation that needs to be had. And so I love that you're bringing it up as part of your recovery. Yeah. And I'm saying that from my perspective as too, because I quit the first time because alcohol was ruining my life. Like, it was running me. And I think you and I are different in this sense, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I wanted my time that I drank to have no emotion to it. I didn't want to be sad. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be happy. I didn't want to be celebrating anything. I wanted to try. This is how I validated it. I was going to take all the emotions of why I used to drink out of it. And just like, it just happened to be a date. It happened to be an afternoon matinee. We went to dinner and I was like, now's the time, because I have zero like attachment to the alcohol, like for a purpose.
Right.
Something or adding something, and I had those 2 drinks, which led to the conversations in your head. Just, whenever. It's just, they'll be social. Only when I'm out of the house. Only when, and then you go to liquor store buying to bring, and you're like, well, this is not working.
Something went wrong here.
Not very good at this conversation with myself. But when I stopped again, it was because I was breaking up with alcohol for the right reasons, in my opinion, because I wanted to, not because I had to, right?
Yeah. And I think that's really important, because there was a time when alcohol, like quitting alcohol, was a necessity. But when it's more or less like, somebody said to me once, like the first time I was sober, like, she wants to be sober more than she wants to be drunk. That's a good place to be. And I think of like the last time, and I go, I wanted to be sober more than I wanted to be drunk. Like, I love the life. I love being sober. I love recovery. I love feeling my emotions and building a deeper spiritual practice and path and being able to connect with people. And so, it was like, duh, why wouldn't I do it?
Here we go. Top 10 things you love about being sober. Go.
Oh, interesting question. Okay. I love not being hungover.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
It's so bad. I had like 3-day hangovers, like, and it wasn't because it messed with my brain. So I'd be really, really depressed for about 3 days. I would definitely gain a little weight, and that sounds really superficial, but it wasn't good for my body. In terms of that, I don't pick fights with people. I don't say horribly hurtful things that I don't mean to somebody. I don't feel like I'm ever,
What do you like? They're like top 10 reasons you love to be sober are all very negative right now. Not having a hangover. Start from that one.
Okay. So my body feeling great of not having a hangover. Remembering what I did the night before. being able to process my emotions in a healthful and helpful way. I think I'm a better sister, daughter, and aunt sober. I'm a better worker sober, for sure. I'm more tapped into my creativity. I feel healthier. I said that as a hangover thing, but I feel like I'm passionate about like rock climbing and moving my body, and I can do those things better. I'm not, oh, that's a negative. I am my own master. That's 8. Oh my God. I don't waste my money. I save my money. And I'm able to help people who have been through similar struggles.
That is amazing. And it sounds so much better in the positive than the negative.
That was a good point out. Thank you. I was like, I didn't even realize I did it until.
But it's true, because we're like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm going to add an 11th, and I don't know if this is true for you, but sex is so much better sober. See, I was a lot crazier before, but I have so much more feeling now.
Yeah. Well, one of my biggest issues is like I struggle with intimacy. So I will say it's more meaningful sober for me. We're working on it being like me being more present when I'm like intimate with somebody. Because that's part of the reason why I love drinking, was I could just shut my brain off and like allow myself to feel a little bit, but it wasn't meaningful.
Right. And it wasn't real feeling. It was like, you know what I mean? It was totally implied. Like there.
Yeah.
Like, but like, I'm telling you guys straight up, for those listeners, my orgasms are like 100 times more like intense now than they were when I was numb from the alcohol.
That's amazing.
It could take me forever. Like, have you ever had drunk sex where it's like an hour later and you're like, again, do it. No, it's like 2 minutes into sex. I'm like, done. That was great, honey. Thanks.
Look at all this time we have now.
Oh, now let's go for a 2 kilometer, 10 kilometer walk, whatever. Right. Like, so that was, I'm just poking an 11th in there. But if you could go back and talk to somebody right now who is where you were, like when you were in your peak discomfort, and like, what would you say?
I would say that there is another way, and that I don't know if I would, because I do actually have some friends who are younger in that space, and that I found another way, and that the things that they're looking for through alcohol or through the bottle, they're not going to find them. But it's okay if they don't want to stop right now. And I know that there's so much talk about, addiction and getting sober. And I think one of the hardest things for people is when they feel ashamed because they don't want to stop. And so I would also say, if you're not ready, that's okay.
That's a really good point, right? Because no one would have ever gotten me to stop when I needed to get me to stop. Mm-hmm. And I think even seeing them, and for them, regardless, drinking or not, is part of the recovery.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And recovery is it's just such a multi-dimensional process, and it's so different and so personal for everyone that we can't possibly know what's right for somebody else just based on what we've done ourselves. So I think just opening up and like releasing the stigma and the expectations around it just is so much more welcoming for somebody who's.
I think this is coming through like in, how did you work through the shame of the alcohol abuse?
I think once I really started to see, it was like external work first. It was seeing how other people were doing the best they could with what they had. I was able to be compassionate towards others before I was able to be compassionate towards myself. And once I got that, then, my mentor at the time kind of helped me turn that around on me, and just say, like, you're doing the best you can. You were doing the best you can. There's no shame in how you chose. Like, we all have pain, we all suffer, and we all choose different things to medicate that. And some of those things are really helpful and healthy, and some of those things aren't. And so even when I've gone back out or drank again, I've really just tried to, while holding myself accountable, not beat myself up and not be ashamed of it, because this is my story and it's my journey. And I fully trust that every single step of it, there's such a bigger picture that I can't see yet, that it's all playing a part in it. So
I love that. And I love you. And I'm so grateful. You. Like, you don't even know that you came and you were willing to open up, because, talking about sexuality and talking about alcohol and talking about the things that we talked about today isn't the easiest. It doesn't show off our shiniest side of
it doesn't.
Our storyline. But there's two humans who are sitting here in this podcast, and I have zero guilt or shame about the decisions that I have made up until this moment. And Kristen shook her head no as well, because it was part of, the direction we needed to go. Everything is the lesson or the gift in our lives. And, each of these came with a lesson that I'm so grateful for, that can make me the better human that I am today. And I have a question that I always ask, because I think it's really, really powerful. And I'm super curious what yours is. You can only choose one. You probably know what I'm going to ask, but it's the what book made a pivotal role in your life through all of this?
So the first spiritual book that I ever read was The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. And that was the book that a therapist had recommended it to me. It wasn't even from the program, but that opened me up to so much kind of grace and just shifting the way that I viewed the world. So I love that book. I love Dan Millman. I've read, I think it's a trilogy of the Peaceful Warrior series. So there's the Journey of Socrates and the Sacred Journey of the Peaceful Warrior. But all of those books I read them in succession of one another. They all made such a huge impact in the beginning for me.
That's a secret way to throw 3 books into the question. I'm just kidding. Rule breaker. But again, I think this was such an important conversation. And I mean, guys, if you're listening, I was sober a year and I fell out of sobriety. And I'm only back in it again. Look at me, I have to think about this for 6 weeks, right? So I was out for 4 to 6 weeks and back in, and I'm so grateful to the lesson I learned. So the moral of this is there's no shame. There's no shame, and there's nothing, you know what I mean? Wherever you are in your sobriety journey, even if you drink casually and you like it, we totally say that's fine. It's your path. This isn't a, what is it called? A PSA or whatever?
Oh yeah.
To not drink. No. This is 2 humans who let the drinking control them, that needed to, take that control back. We were extreme cases.
Yes.
So.
And I think there's so many people that are sober curious nowadays.
There's so many people, more and more.
Right. Which is amazing, because that just brings out more fun activities that you can do sober, I think. But yeah, I think even if you just want to, what were you saying?
No, I was going to say something else, but you go.
I was even if you don't want to stop drinking, but you think that the way that you're drinking is problematic or something like that, there's no hierarchy to how, what's more worthy, I guess. I think that there's a lot of judgment, or it feels like a lot of judgment from some of the sober community that says well, either you're sober or you're not. And I just think, just as long as you're happy and healthy and doing what's truly best for you, that's what's best for you. It might not be best for them, might not be best for me, but that's okay.
And that's so true. And what I was going to say too is, wherever we are, it's like when you go to buy a car and, say it's a white Nissan Pathfinder and you've never seen a white Nissan Pathfinder anywhere, you've never noticed it. But the minute you go to buy a car, you start to see that car everywhere you go. When you shift your vibration, right, to sobriety, you will automatically vibrate at a different frequency, and it's like all of a sudden your whole world, you will attract sober friends, sober mentors, sober activities. Like it just opens. If you're afraid, or if you're thinking, well, I won't have any friends, I won't know what to do, the universe works with you to make that happen.
Yeah.
So.
It's my life is so full now, and it's not full of going out to bars. It's not, it's simpler, but yeah, it's always been my experience that as I rise, as my vibration changes, everything kind of rises to meet you there. So it's not lonely.
It's not lonely. Not at all. Look at us. It was super fun. But I love you, love you, love you. So grateful to you. Thank you to all the listeners. And if you took something away from this, please tag us in Instagram, because especially on this one, guys, we want to hear your takeaways from this. And have an incredible day.